Welcome back to another video. Today we don't have the usual intro because although I did record it, it got deleted somehow, so here we are. If you follow me on Instagram or TikTok, or maybe you watch the shorts here on YouTube, you'll know that this week's project is going to be a 1950s inspired power suit in celebration of International Women's Day. But if you're new here, hi, I'm Olga and I make sewing content that is usually vintage inspired and sometimes a little bit nerdy. I'm taking another crack at the vintage Burda blazer that I made last year for my vintage Hogwarts uniform. I love that blazer, but I feel like the fit isn't great, so I decided to size up. Ideally, I want a pencil skirt pinafore style dress, but maybe just a pencil skirt if there's not enough fabric to go with this blazer and, make a whole suit situation. So I'm starting off by retracing all 13 pattern pieces in the next size for the blazer. For the skirt, I already have the pattern that I want to use, so that's just gonna wait until I've got the blazer done. For reference, the one that I made last summer was a size 36, and this is going to be a size 38. I'm doing it straight, no modifications, just to try if the size fixes my fit issues. To trace patterns, there's two methods that I use normally depending on a few factors. The first one is to just use white tissue paper and place it over my pattern sheets and just trace. Depending on the size of the tissue paper and the pattern pieces, it might be necessary to tape pieces of paper together. This is really useful for things that are really sensitive, like maybe you're using a vintage pattern and you don't want to, ruin it. You want to be really careful with it. So this would be a really good method. It also is a little bit more expensive because obviously tissue paper is more expensive than, regular paper. So yeah, you have those two, pros and cons. The second method that I like to use is wrapping paper and a tracing wheel. For this method, I usually lay down a towel or like a piece of thicker fabric, and then I place the wrapping paper over it and then the pattern sheet over the wrapping paper. Then I use the tracing wheel to go over those lines, and this creates indents on the wrapping paper that I then use, as the lines of the pattern. The pros of this is that it's really easy. I think it's more accurate and it's much cheaper because obviously wrapping paper is a lot less expensive. Oh, and also you don't have to tape things together because wrapping paper comes in very long rolls, so there's no maneuvering of pieces, or a lot less, and I think that makes it a lot quicker and just a lot easier. However, you do have the downside that you're tracing over the pattern and then you're creating indents in the pattern sheets as well, which, if you're using something that you want to be really delicate with, then maybe is not the best option. Once I had my pattern traced, I added seam allowance. Burda magazine patterns usually call for a 1.5 seam allowance and then 4 centimeters for hem allowances, but I just usually add 1.5 all around to everything because in my experience that 4 centimeters makes garments too long for me. Now that I have my pattern ready, I can start laying the pieces over my fabric, and then I quickly realize that I will not have enough fabric for a skirt, let alone a dress. So I'm going to have to think about what to do in regards to that, but I'm just going to go ahead and get started on making the blazer anyway, because that's going to be the most complicated part of this anyway. I'm using this gray kind of twill fabric that I got secondhand. I don't know what the composition of this is, but it is kind of scratchy and it has a kind of sheen or sparkle to it and some light, and it's definitely synthetic. When all the pieces are pinned to the fabric, I started cutting it out and then transferring the markings over to the fabric. I'm transferring the darts with a heat erasable pen and then adding the center front lapel fold lines and button placement with stitch marking, as I'll be pressing the fabric before I get to those, and then if I did heat erasable pens, only they would disappear before I got to them. So that wouldn't be very smart. I could do chalk as well, but that would mean that I have to then probably wash this, and it's a blazer. Am I really going to wash this that often? If ever. Who knows? I'm also pinning everything I can while I go, including my sleeves, the center back seam, and all of those darts. There are so many darts. Here, I also cut out my interfacing for the facing pieces. I'm using my usual Vlieseline H310, but I will link it for you in the description. I did decide to make the outer jacket first and then get to the lining later because I'll need to change my needle to sew the lining, and this will just save me having to constantly change needles. So then I started stitching those seams, making sure I'm backstitching at the start and finish of my seams. For the darts, I only backstitch at the white parts, and then I leave a long tail of thread to tie them off when I press them. When I had all those seams stitched, I pressed them, obviously. I'm clipping any curved seams to help with the bulk and using my tailor's ham and seam roll to give me better results. Again, those will be linked for you in the description. The pattern does tell you to clip the darts, but I really don't like doing that, so I'm just gonna leave it as is. For my next batch of pinning, I pinned the side back pieces to their respective peplum pieces with right sides together. I'm not sure if this is a true peplum, but that's what I'm calling it to make it easier to describe, because obviously my pattern's in Portuguese and I don't know what they call these pieces in English. Anyway, I also pinned the side front pieces to their peplum, trying to match the darts to form a really nice line. And then I went ahead and stitched those in place, and when I was pressing them, I realized that because of the angle of the darts on the front peplum pieces, the lines didn't line up after sewing, which is really weird because they did line up perfectly with the size down. So I think that might be a sizing issue. Anyway, I decided that I didn't care, and I kept on going. Then I pinned my side backs to the center back piece with right sides together and stitched that in place too, pressing it afterwards, of course. At this point, I realized I had been overly confident in my knowledge of this pattern because I completely forgot that I needed the pocket pieces out of the lining to finish putting the front of the jacket together. I decided to switch gears, and when I say I decided, I was forced to switch gears and cut out all of the lining pieces, then put the lining together and then get back to the jacket. The lining fabric I chose was this sheer tartan that I've had in my stash for, I want to say about 8 years, from when I first started sewing. I have no idea what it is. It's definitely some kind of, I think a viscose poly blend, but I'm not sure. But I got it from a clearance bin in a fabric store, and honestly, it's just been in my sewing room ever since. I never knew what to do with it, so here we are. I quickly realized that this is a very flimsy fabric and it just wants to dance around a ton and move everywhere and make everything super difficult for me. Spoiler alert, I think the lining was very successful in doing that. Anyway, so I had to get out my cutting mat and the rotary cutter. I placed some makeshift pattern weights on the fabric and cut it out this way. It did make the cutting process a little bit easier, and it felt like the fabric wasn't moving as much. Whether or not it was, I don't know. Once I'd cut out the lining, I started pinning it together, and boy, this was such a challenge. It just wanted to do anything but what I wanted it to do, and I have to admit that some of the darts, and maybe not just the darts, came out a little wonky because I think I also just didn't have the patience to make it better, but yeah, we're moving along. I switched over to a 70 sewing needle, and that did make the sewing a little bit better, but honestly, I'm happy that I no longer have this fabric in my stash and I never have to work with it again. Oh, and my sewing machine has an inbuilt walking foot, which is a big help here and for a lot of projects too. So once I'd sewn those seams, I pressed and clipped them. Okay, so time for a little update. No, I'm just realizing that I sewed this on backwards. This is supposedly the front. This is how it actually, I stitched it on backwards. But yeah, the pocket is this little thingy that goes here. So when I stitch this, the pocket needs to be in already. So I'm glad I noticed that I stitched this on backwards. Why is one of them right and the other one's wrong? Probably because this is it's not very easy to see which is the right and which is the wrong side. So anyway, I have to unpick that and do that again. Zeus is home from his walk. Come on, buddy. Hello. Okay, bye. and I've been stitching that together and just pressing it. But in between that, my camera died and I didn't realize because I was annoyed at this fabric because, as you can tell, it's very drapey and it's very flimsy and it's very, very thin, which will be nice for a lining. And it's gonna be fine once it's in the jacket, but it's very annoying to work with. It's the end of the day, the end of the work day. So I think what's gonna happen is I'm just gonna put this away for today. Tomorrow I'll come back fresh, put my pocket in properly, and then I can, you know, it's been a day. I also got out my yellow version of this jacket just to have here for reference, because as we all know, Burda instructions, they're better now, but they're not the best. So sometimes you need to look at, like, I need a visual aid. So it actually does help quite a bit to have something that you already made that you can actually look at and kind of like feel and be like, oh yeah, I remember putting this together and stuff. Although I've done this before and it is turning out to be a little bit easier than last time because I've done it before, so it's not as unfamiliar to me. It's still a complex garment to put together. It's still like a challenging garment, and the last time I did it was, you know, it was like 6 months ago, maybe more than that. The next day, I came back fresh and started the day by fixing my mistakes from the previous day. I unpicked that seam and stitched it back on properly, and then I kept putting the lining together by repeating all the steps I'd done for the jacket and steps I'm still going to do for the jacket, but in this annoying fabric, so I probably didn't film all that much of it. I'm really sorry. Anyway, then I started pinning the center fronts to the side fronts with right sides together. Update. So I couldn't really remember what I was doing. I started trying to read the instructions of the pattern and I got really confused. Here's the plan, okay? What I did was I went back and watched my video on this jacket that I made, the yellow one, and I made a very good job of explaining it, so that's great. I'm really happy about that. I've gone ahead and made some notes on what I'm supposed to be doing, like what needs to happen in what order, especially like considering what I told you guys and myself, I guess, what I put in that video of like things that I did in the wrong order or things that I wish I'd done differently. I'm still not clear on how the neck facing is going to work out, like this piece. I've got the tag ready to go in, and I like to add this ribbon to jackets because then when you want to like hang them up, it just, I think it's a nice touch. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but we'll figure it out when we get there. I'm going to get back on the sewing horse, try to, you know, move things along. And move things along we did. So I started this new day with sewing on my tag to the next facing and the center seam on the lapel of the front facing pieces, as well as the side front princess seams that I had pinned before. After pressing and clipping all of that, I pinned the straight edge of the pocket lining to the straight edge of the front or side front pieces, and this is where I had been confused last time I was pinning things. Again, I sewed those seams and pressed them. Now it was time to just pin down the pocket on the front up to where the opening is, and then slip stitch that closed by hand. Once that was done, I could pin the jacket together at the shoulder and side seams. I knew that the pattern asked for a shoulder gather on the back pieces, but I really didn't like the way that looked on the yellow version. So I decided to make a little tuck instead, and I think that does look a lot better. I sewed those seams and pressed them, and then my blazer was finally starting to take shape. I'm so excited. Okay, I tried it on really quickly, and I found that the fit was much better so far, so it really motivated me to keep going. I then pinned the center back seam of the lapels, stitched that closed, and pressed that seam. This is going to leave a little opening in the top of the jacket at the neck. So now I just have to pin the neck of the lapel to the neck of the back, and that's going to close that. The next day, I stitched that seam in place. It's a really weird one, and I did have to go back and forth picking little spots that had like tucks in it or that were like catching the seam allowance weird. But I think after some finagling, I did get that the way I wanted it to be. And then, of course, I pressed that. Next, it was time to set in the sleeves. I found the notches on them to make sure that I had the sleeves, matched to their respective sides. And I did pin those in place using a heck ton of pins. I really tried to match the underarm seams and then the back seam of the sleeve to the back princess seam. And I think I did a good job. And then the pattern does call for a gathering stitch on the sleeve to ease the sleeve in, but I like to add some drama to my sleeves, so I did a box pleat instead at the shoulder. Then I stitched all of those in place and, of course, pressed them. When the sleeves were in, I tried the blazer on again, got really excited, and marked the hem of the sleeves. I found that this jacket needed a bigger hem than the previous one. Anyway, I pressed in the hem of the sleeves at the marked location, and then I slip stitched the raw edge down by hand as the pattern told me to and also passed me. Update. We have a shell of a jacket. It's looking really good. What I did last time was I stitched the facing, so this part to the jacket, and then I did the neck facing because that was kind of like what I thought the instructions were telling me. And I am thinking about like trying to sew this on, like attach these and then sew it to the jacket because I feel like that might make it easier. For the facings, I marked the seam allowance on both of them to make it easier to match up the lines, and then I pinned one of the short sides of the neck facing to the front facing, and I started sewing it. When I got to the corner, I pivoted and I kept sewing the long, like sort of rounded edge of the neck facing to the front facing, and then again at the corner, I did the same thing. It feels like the neck facing was a little bit too big, so I did chop off the seam allowance and I called it good. And I think sewing on the neck facing to the front facing before I put it onto the jacket was a good idea. Then I trimmed those seams and pressed them, and I could move on to pinning the facings to the jacket, starting at the center seam of the lapel, and then working my way down from there on each side. I stitched that in place and started pressing. I wanted to press the seams open and then press the facing in place because I really didn't want to do an understitch here because it will be visible. But at the rounded edges, of course, of the lapel, that became too difficult, so I then just pressed it flat. Next, I started pinning the lining to the facings. I started by matching the center back of the lining to the center of the neck facing and then working my way down on each side, just like I did for the facings. But then disaster struck. Okay, that might be a little bit dramatic, but I did realize that one side of the lining was like so much shorter somehow, like 4 or 5 centimeters. I have no idea how this happened. I mean, probably something shifted, but I don't know. Short of making the whole like side front of the lining again, I didn't really see how I could fix it. I didn't have any more fabric left, so I kind of just decided to go ahead and just figure it out later. Once I had sewn that in place, I trimmed the seam allowances and pressed them. I took a moment here to tack the neck of the lining to the neck of the jacket, as this was a step that I skipped in the last yellow jacket and I kind of regretted it. So I did it here. And then I started procrastinating the hem of the jacket by hemming the sleeve linings. I did this by pulling the sleeve lining into the sleeve first, and then I folded up the seam allowances of the lining by the same amount as I had folded the jacket sleeves, which in my case for this one was 3 centimeters, but for reference, in the yellow jacket I did 1.5, so just so you know. Then I pinned that in place and slip stitched the sleeve lining to the seam allowance of the sleeve for an invisible finish. Now I had to tackle the hem of the jacket. There's no putting it off anymore. So I started by pinning up the seam allowance of the jacket and the facings. From the center seam, I eyeballed how much of the seam allowance of the lining I had to fold up, which in hindsight was a mistake. And I pinned that to the seam allowance of the jacket because it did look like it was way too long. Anyway, When I got to the problem area on the right side of the lining, I just tried my best to hide any raw edges and kind of hoped for the best, really. That all gets sewn up by hand, which, you know, I did that, starting on the left side of the jacket and working towards the right, trying to make my stitches as invisible as possible. I then remembered that I still had to make buttonholes, so I picked out some buttons with the help of my partner, and then I marked the buttonholes accordingly. I made them on the machine using my buttonhole foot, and then I sewed the buttons on by hand because they were too big to sew on my machine. I don't know, I didn't try. I just thought it'd be quicker to do by hand. Anyway, so without further ado, here's the reveal. Okay, so wrap up time. The, power suit idea turned into a power blazer idea. My camera died, so where were we? I'm glad I went a size up. That's definitely resolved a lot of the issues I was having with the yellow one. However, there's still a weird fit thing here. I don't know what this whole thing is about, because we do have a dart here somewhere. There's dart. No, that's a princess seam. Oh, there's dart here. I don't know. I feel like there's too much fabric here. I don't know why. That's the only really fit issue I have right now with it. The other issues that I have with this particular jacket are just, I chose the wrong lining, I think, again. It moved around so much that I had a really hard time sewing it, and I think I ended up making some mistakes, not only with cutting, but also with just sewing it. That meant that then it affected the fit. So at the back, you could see in the reveal, it's pulling my blazer up a little bit. I think I could fix that because I did put a lot of seam allowance up a lot. And I did have to do a little bit of a weird thing here to get it to work. I think I sewed both of my sleeves. So I sewed one of them with right sides together, and I think I sewed the other one with wrong sides together because both of them were the same. And then I had two sleeves that were like two right sleeves instead of one right and one left. And I went ahead and did it anyway because I just wanted to get it done. And it is making the fit of this left sleeve weird. Having said that, I definitely tackled the issue with the neck facing. I think we've figured that out. So yeah, I don't know if I'm going to make this blazer again. I really love it. I really like the idea of it. I like the lines of it, and I really like how it looks on the photograph of the pattern, on the magazine. I don't know if I'm going to make it again. I might do, because I feel like I'm not finished with it yet, but I definitely want to give it some time before I do that, because I'm kind of annoyed with this one because of the lining, which is really my fault. But let me know what you thought about it. Let me know if you would make this blazer. What would you do differently? How do you think I should fix these issues? Should I try this again with a different fabric? I also didn't love working with this gray fabric. It's very scratchy. Also, happy International Women's Day. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I put out new videos every Friday at 4 p.m. GMT, and there's also some short form content throughout the week. And also consider following me on Instagram or TikTok. I have all of those linked below, so they're very easy to find. And as always, everything that I used that I can link is linked in the description, so check that out. There's some affiliate links there, so if you're looking for a way to help me out and support the channel, that's a good way to do it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!